All right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Lane. I'm the Special Collections Librarian for the Indianapolis Public Library. Today, we have our presenter, Sally Childs-Helton, who is the head of Special Collections at Butler University and is here to share insights into taking care of your own family history at home. Each participant here today will receive a copy of the book Saving Stuff by Smithsonian curator Don Williams. So stay tuned after today's program, and I will send out a follow up email to get your copy of the book sent to your nearest library branch. If you are taking this workshop for an LEU, please sign in the chat now, and we'll make sure you get your LEU. And please keep your microphone and camera off during the duration of Sally's presentation since we are recording. However, please feel free to type your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will be sure to get to as many of them as we can during the Q&A. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Without further ado, I turn it over to Sally to show us how to save our stuff archivally at home. Sally, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, I will mention Stephen was one of my interns several years ago, and not only did we really have a lot of fun. He learned a lot. I learned from him, and obviously we've stayed in touch because he is now a colleague, which always makes you happy when you have an intern who later turns into a professional colleague. So
Yeah, Sally taught me everything I know. I'll say that. So I had to get you in for a program, absolutely.
oops, that is not sharing. Okay, so let me. Okay, are we up?
Yes, we are. I see it.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to save your stuff archivally at home. Stuff is a legitimate archival term, and archivists use it all the time. It's like I have a box of stuff. So it is a legitimate term. Um, I'm going to present for just under an hour, and then we'll have about half an hour for Q&A. And please realize we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to know about all of these formats, but this will at least get you into the ballpark and help you start knowing what questions to ask about materials that you have. So consider this a very general introduction. And I would like to thank Stephen and Indy Public Library for having me. I am going to be moving fast, so please feel free to take notes as you can. You will be able to go back and have access to the recording later. And also, you'll get the Don Williams book, which is really excellent. I really like his approach to this. And so our original plan today was to do this as a hands-on workshop. And in that case, you would have been able to handle more materials. We could have demonstrated and had practice at a little hands-on conservation and things like that. And with luck, we'll have a chance to do that later after the pandemic dies down a little bit. But for today, I've translated as much of that as I can into Zoom. So with that, hang on, and I will be glad later to answer questions, make note of questions you've got. One thing I will mention is I started taking classes from master conservators years ago as part of learning how to be a better archivist. And then I started taking training in book arts, which also has made me a much better archivist. At this point, I've learned how to make paper, how to marble paper, and how to make books. And that's made me a much better steward of the materials that I've got. So, so any skill sets that you bring already that have to do with crafting, paper arts, sewing, any kind of handwork that you do, even woodworking and other forms of handwork, all can come in usefully as you start dealing with your own materials. So our goals today are to give you a basic understanding of conservation and preservation. And for our case today, I'm going to use very, very loose definitions of conservation and preservation. Preservation are things that you can do in terms of your own storage and display to help your materials have their longest lifespan. Conservation deals with cleaning beyond the basics. It deals with repair and restoration. And often this is left to professionals because it can take years of training. But we're going to talk about how to apply basics in the home environment, how to deal with the most commonly collected materials, how to deal with digital materials, and when to consult a professional conservator or appraiser. Again, a caveat, my expertise and experience in working in archives for over 40 years is strongest in books, paper formats, and sound formats, and some artifacts as well, because I have been the steward of mixed materials collections for most of my career. There are many areas in which I have little expertise, and these are areas in which other people have spent lifetimes specializing in just a few formats. So as you need this specialization, please seek it out. You don't want to do more damage to your materials out of ignorance. And there will be a lot of formats that we're not going to cover today, since we could spend days on each one. But again, the goal is here to give you an overview with guidance to starting your own education on saving some of the most commonly held materials at home. Importantly, ask yourself why you want to save your stuff. Do you want to see it and use it and enjoy it on a daily basis? Do you want to give it its maximum protection to ensure its monetary and historic value? Are you somewhere between those two aspects? Do you want to save it to pass on to family members or to a repository? And also, very importantly, why is this valuable to you? Is it of historic, emotional, or financial value? And it may be several of those simultaneously. So why you want to save your stuff is going to guide you to your best answer for your needs and for the needs of your stuff. Different items are going to have different answers, different levels of care and protection, and there is no one size fits all answer. So if one of you has a family diary from 1900, let's say 3 of you have a similar family diary from a similar period, you may make 3 totally different decisions about how you want to take care of this thing. So again, it's as with everything in archives, the answer is it depends. If your stuff has real historic or monetary value, consider including it in your will to be gifted to a repository, and it always helps to give money to help keep it up, or donate it to a repository while you can and keep copies for your own enjoyment. And one general rule is that if you cannot care for it properly, get it to a repository that can, because that's what we're here for. Talk to your family members about what stuff they want to keep after you're done with it, and this will help guide you again in its care and eventual disposition. Many younger people now don't want to be weighed down with the stuff of previous generations. And what's precious to you may not be precious to a generation that doesn't know family members or wasn't born when a particular event occurred. It's not important to them. So don't assume the next generation will want or care for your stuff like you do. There's a lot of historically valuable material that has been tossed when the kids clean out the house. Archivists hear this story every day just about. So somebody saves it and saves it and saves it, and the kids or the family really don't know what the material is, and they're cleaning the house out as fast as they can, and next thing you know, it's in the recycle bin or it's out in the garbage can. If your stuff is monetarily valuable, consider taking out an insurance rider in case it's damaged or destroyed, and have it reviewed every few years, because market value prices for some things, including antiques and rare books, is going down. Again, because younger people aren't collecting these things. Get an appraisal done for insurance from an accredited appraiser. We'll talk about this later. You need an appraisal for high ticket items that you want to donate to a repository for tax purposes anyway. And also beware asking dealers for appraisals. Dishonest ones will quote you low and then try to buy it from you. So we'll talk about that too. So we will move on to enemies of materials. And literally everything is trying to damage or kill your stuff. So common enemies of our collectibles are poor environment, and this includes temperature and humidity, and also dust and dirt, light of all sorts, acids in paper, ink, and other materials, and there are also many, many other chemical reactions, critters, insects, and mold, also poor storage and display, rough and incorrect handling, incorrect cleaning methods and materials, disasters and emergencies, and believe it or not, theft. Environmental concerns, and this is a picture of a hygrometer thermometer that you should have in every room near where you're keeping your stuff. So for temperature and humidity, you want to aim for a reasonable 65 to 70 degrees and about 50% humidity. And again, keep a thermometer, hygrometer in those rooms and keep an eye on it. What's more important is constant levels and not fluctuating levels, because fluctuating levels of temperature and humidity cause materials to flex at the micro level, and over the years it creates cracks and other damage. Keep in mind, mold starts to grow above 60% humidity, and the warmer it is, the faster the mold grows. So don't put your valuables anywhere you're not going to be comfortable, and that includes attics, basements, garages, storage sheds. And also really bad for your storage and display are outer walls, closets on outer walls, near fireplaces, near heat and air conditioning vents, near exterior doors, near windows, or across from windows that have a lot of sun exposure. This is an example of light damage that I found on a book here that had been in one of our stacks that was facing outward to a westward facing window. So you can see how much fade has happened to that over the years. So light damage is, light is everywhere. So protecting things from light is really important. If you're serious, you can get UV filtering film to use on windows. If you still got fluorescent light bulbs, you can use sleeves on those. Also, UV filtering glass on anything that's framed, and it's worth the protection. You can also use drapes or blinds on windows. You don't want to hang or display items in direct sunlight or point spotlights at them. You want indirect light when possible. Don't use display cases with built-in lights, because again, you get light damage and you also get heat buildup. Light fades inks and dyes and breaks down a lot of materials. Some light is more damaging than others, but all light is damaging. And we're finding out that LED lights are the least damaging. So a lot of archives and museums are trying to swap out lights to LED right now. Archivally boxing and wrapping materials protect them from light, and it slows down temperature and humidity fluctuations. It also keeps out dust. So we put our materials into these microenvironments that are more stable, and again, that slow down that fluctuation. A little bit about slow fires. Just about all of us have paperback books that are browning out around the edges. And these are two good examples just that my husband pulled off the shelf for me. But you can see definitely that they're browning out. This is what the Library of Congress calls slow fires, because the paper is chemically burning. So most paper made over the last century and even earlier is made of wood pulp, which is naturally very acidic. And early paper and very fine paper now is made of non-acidic rag, and also more just office paper is being made acid-free, but it becomes acidic over time. In books, again, oxidation shows up first at the edges, where the acid in the paper meets the air. And acid damage also happens when paper or just about anything comes in contact with something acidic for a period of time. And this can include things stored in cardboard boxes, books with newspaper clippings laid in them. I've also seen it happen on wood shelving that's very acidic. And remember that acid moves from the most acidic item into the least acidic item. So that's why even if you have a newspaper clipping in a book, 3 or 4 pages beyond that, you may also see the acid shadow of that newspaper. Also, paper and ink both can be acidic. You may have seen books and manuscript materials where the area of the page with the type or the handwriting is brown, again, because of acidic ink. And in other cases, the ink is fine, but your paper is acidic. And once paper or other materials are damaged this way, it cannot be reversed. So all you can do is move it to another format by photocopying or scanning, for example. And this is why archival storage materials, boxes, folders, and so forth, are acid-free, so that they not only don't further damage materials, but it slows down this migration of acid from one item to the next. Lots of kinds of chemical reactions, and common ones include materials that are acidic or become acidic over time, but other reactions include plastics and rubber that break down over time. Plastics are petroleum products, and they off-gas. Anything that off-gases damages other materials they're stored with. And also rubber, being a natural product, can harden. So again, you don't want rubber bands in your collection. They turn into little hard, nasty worms that are really hard to get off of paper or whatever they're on. Metals can rust and damage other materials, so remove staples, paper clips, metal brads, pens, and any other kind of metal bindings. Magnetic tapes and film, like magnetic tapes, I'm talking about cassette tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, VHS tapes, and film like home movies, degrade and off-gas, again, damaging things stored with them. Glues and other materials used to stick things to paper, including tape, again, can become unstable. And in general, store like with like, so that once materials start to off-gas, they don't damage other kinds of materials. Some items, like toys that are made out of multiple materials, can be really, really challenging. And that's, we won't be able to go into depth on things like that today, but just be aware that when you have heavily mixed material items, that they take very special care. A little bit on critters and mold. And this is a charming picture of some roach eggs that I found. So I was not excited to find these in the library on the first floor, far away from my shop, thank goodness. So again, exercise good critter hygiene. You want to keep all kinds of bugs and vermin out of your home. Not all bugs eat paper, but a lot of them will be attracted to paper, glue, leather, hide, other organic materials. Definitely keep food and drink away from your materials. Check anything new that comes in the house to make sure it's not infested. So look for silverfish, mold, and other kinds of bugs. If they are, don't bring the stuff in your home until everything is cleared out. If you find live bugs or egg cases or active mold, contact a professional. I would urge you not to mess with mold. It takes special training to clean it, and it can be dangerous. In terms of cleaning, you want to clean your shelving, your storage and display areas on a regular basis. Don't use anything that leaves an oily or chemical residue, including most household cleaners, furniture polish, or chemically impregnated cleaning cloths like Swiffers. Use a clean cloth or a soft brush to remove dust. If you need to damp clean shelves, I use distilled water and rubbing alcohol, about half and half if I need to remove grease, and let shelves dry thoroughly before replacing your items. This is one of my favorite cleaning tools. This is a ground eraser cleaning pad, and it's great for cleaning paper items. I know, not photos, for cleaning book covers and some artifacts. Like I used one of these to clean some tape residue off of an old leather basketball. So they work on a lot of things, but beware, because you literally can erase things on the surface. So emergencies and disasters, pardon me. If you remember one thing today, never endanger your life to save your collection. Ever, ever, ever. So store a list and photographs of your valuables off-site, updated as you need to. If you have materials worth monetary value, get them appraised again every 5 to 10 years and insure them with a separate rider if replacement value is important. If you have a disaster and your materials are damaged but not destroyed, contact a professional conservator immediately, and include plans for your collection in your will. Or again, it could get pitched or sold. Archivists and museum curators love to have materials donated because, again, we can care for it properly and we can make it accessible to a larger public. Make physical or digital copies of especially important materials. Keep them in another location. Don't store your stuff in places where disasters are likely to happen, including basements, attics, garages, yard sheds, storage units. These places are rarely temperature and humidity controlled, and it can be a very long time before you discover any damage. I cannot tell you the number of times somebody has gone looking for the Civil War letters that were up in the attic, and that's where the roof leak was, or they've stored other family materials in the basement and they find them and the rats have made a nest in it. So store stuff in safe places to start with. If you have stuff that's very valuable, and by this I'm including physically, historically, and emotionally, include it in your home disaster or emergency plan. And again, never, ever, ever risk your life to save your stuff. So a little bit about proper use of materials. A lot of damage comes simply from incorrect handling. So make sure your hands are clean and free of food grease, dirt, hand lotion, hand sanitizer. Wash your hands before you handle materials. And don't eat, drink, or smoke around your collections, and don't have those things near them, because Mr. Murphy will make sure that that cup of coffee that you've got over on the table is going to get spilled. So just don't have the stuff around it. Use book props or gloves when you're handling materials as needed. I will note gloves are good for handling unsleeved photos and some metals and some kinds of art, but otherwise, I am a clean hands person because gloves hurt your dexterity and you can do more damage being clumsy with gloves, especially when you're handling paper items. When writing around your materials, only use pencil, simply because it erases and pen doesn't. You don't want to lean on, write on top of, or put objects on top of your collectibles. Don't let others photograph with a flash or scan your materials, again, because of light and pressure damage. Photocopying, one photocopy can be about as destructive as leaving something out in the sun for a day. So again, you do it as few times as possible to ensure that you've got backup copies, and if you need copies, you copy the copy. And if other people want to handle your materials, instruct them in the proper use, or make them off limits, or ask them to handle copies. For example, if the grandkids want to take the Civil War letters to school for show and tell, have color photocopies made and send those, because photocopying is much less damaging than 25 little sets of hands. I've seen gorgeous Civil War letters that have been marred by people writing across the top in ballpoint pen, return to X family. Also, be aware that visitors to your home, including friends and family, may leave with souvenirs. I've had a number of people tell me that After family reunions or parties, things have gone missing. So this is something else to be aware of. I hate to say it, but it does happen. A little bit more on storage and display. Prepare your materials as archivally as you can for storage and display by removing metals, rubber bands, non-archival storage bags, any acidic wrappers, envelopes, folders, things like that. Clean the items as necessary, but again, really do your homework before starting. Cleaning can do more damage than leaving the material alone. And some of that's very material specific. For example, people have ruined that yellow christening gown by dipping it in a bleach solution to try to whiten it. And again, they've totally ruined the piece. So there's something to be said for just letting it be itself. Basic rule, store like with like. So again, store similar media and formats and sizes. So keep your trade paperbacks separate from your hardbacks, keep your VHS tapes separate from your DVDs, keep photos separate from letters, things like that. And take into account differences in chemical makeup, size, weight, and so forth can cause storage damage. Store items and original enclosures like boxes separately if the box is going to damage the contents, and use proper storage conditions for each medium and format. Use acid-free folders, boxes, or envelopes, or archival sleeves or mylar enclosures for photographs and other materials. And again, educate yourself on the specific storage needs of various formats. Often what can make sense can also be damaging. One example I will give is my dear husband had wrapped a metal toy of his in saran wrap to protect it. And it was exactly the wrong thing to do. Yes, it keeps dust off, but the saran wrap off gases, and over time it's going to break down and would end up clinging to the metal. So, so what might make sense really isn't. Also, don't attempt repairs or cleaning beyond the basics, so including the eraser powder bags and a very soft hockey dusting brush, again, unless you're trained. Your shelving should be large enough to support materials without anything hanging over the edge. You don't want to create a pressure point on that edge. Shelving and flat storage ideally should be made of enamel-coated metal shelves, except for magnetic mediums like cassette tapes, reel-to-reel tapes, VHS tapes, and in those cases, wood is appropriate. But wood shelving and storage is acidic. It will damage paper and other materials over time. So if you have wood shelving, which most of us do, use a barrier like aluminum foil, mylar, acid-free cardboard, or acid-free Bristol board. These things can be had from your archival supply houses. But remember too that the acid-free cardboard and Bristol board will absorb acid over the years, and in 5 to 10 years, they're going to become acidic, and you'll have to switch everything out. But aluminum foil is easy to find. It's not pretty, but it works. If you frame materials, pay for archival framing. Ask for acid-free mats and backing and UV filtered glass, especially if it's hanging near light. And even though it looks expensive, you'll be glad you did in a number of years, because it really is cheap insurance. People have brought me some things that have been badly damaged by light, and that would have been saved if that had UV framing. If you display your collection at home, rotate parts of it between storage and display like museums do. Most museums, only 5% of their materials are out at any point in time. So again, limiting exposure to damaging elements, but it also lets you enjoy some of your things all the time. You want to make sure that things are displayed and properly supported. Don't use exhibit cases that have interior lights, again, because of light damage and also heat damage. Don't point lights directly at displayed materials. Again, you want indirect light. but some items, some glass, ceramics, some metal materials, pottery, can be safely displayed all the time because they are chemically stable. I'm briefly going to talk a little bit about what happens when an institution wants to borrow your materials. And this probably is going to be something like a local historical society or your local library. So before you agree, make sure that that display environment isn't going to harm it. Display a second copy or a duplicate if possible. All the concerns that have already been raised about environment and storage apply to exhibits. And again, many exhibit cases seem to be designed to harm the materials in them. So you got interior light sources. They can be made out of wood. They may not be particularly secure. Make sure there's no direct light falling on the case or the object. Make sure it's secure physically, that the heat and humidity in the case aren't fluctuating. Make sure the case or the case dressings or props are not off-gassing or will cause damage. And if you lend, do demand a proper archival display environment. Ask if there's insurance coverage in case of loss or damage, and keep a list of what's being loaned along with photographs or copies of all items, and ask for a signed loan agreement with all of the above laid out. Otherwise, you have no recourse if stuff comes back damaged or is lost or stolen. And the longer the exhibit period, the more important this is. 2 weeks is going to be very different from somebody who wants to keep something up, let's say for a centennial year. I'd like to move into common formats that people collect and that you may be interested in. This is just a very quick selection of some of the things that we have here. We've got photographs, we've got rare books, we have manuscripts, we have early digital formats. So a lot of our collectibles are paper. So letters, diaries, photos, books, ledgers, comic books, ticket stubs, programs, etc. We talked about slow fires and that paper made with rag is much more stable and can have a much longer life. We talked about storing like with like and why it's important. Letters should be stored flat, and you want to gently flatten them if you can without damaging them. If they're going to break, you may need to contact a conservator. You want about 20 pages per folder so they're not overstuffed. You want them in acid-free folders and boxes. I would say to store envelopes in other boxes by themselves and make sure that the gummed flap is not stored with the gum side out, because or folded over the top of a letter, because high humidity will activate that gum. Diaries can be stored like books, as can ledgers, bound journals, and things like that. And programs and pamphlets, again, can be stored in appropriately sized envelopes or folders and then in boxes. Here's an example of some manuscripts, both typewritten and handwritten, in an acid-free folder and the Hollinger box that they go in. And this is what they look like in the Hollinger box. You want to store books on appropriate shelving that's large enough to support the entire book. Very large and heavy books, tall books in particular, should be stored flat. These are called folios, and no more than 3 books high. If you have wooden shelves, again, put some kind of a barrier there. If your leather book covers have red rot, which is it's a chemical instability caused by the tanning process for leather around the turn of the last century. And red rot occurs on all colors of leather, but most commonly on reddish leathers. There's a product called Cellugel that literally is a gel like a hair gel that can be applied to consolidate the red rot. Otherwise, the red rot continues and literally it turns into dust and the book falls apart and the red rot dust gets into other things and damages it. Remember, Cellugel is not considered archival because it's not reversible, but you've got a choice between either using Cellugel and stopping the red rot process or having it go ahead and further decay. Fragile books can be wrapped with acid-free Bristol board wrappers, or you can have custom clamshell boxes made, or 4-folder enclosures. Also use props or a book pillow when you're opening and viewing books that have weak boards or spines, so you don't want a lot of pressure put on the gutters, because that's usually the one place where books start to fall apart. These are two kinds of clamshell book boxes. On the left is a custom-made archival cardboard box. These can be had for as low as $7 or $8 and run upwards. The one on the right is a handmade book box that I made out of binding board and cloth. So again, it's archival, but having these made is a whole lot more expensive because they're usually made by hand and to spec for a particular book. And this is what the book in the cardboard clamshell looks like. So you see the fit is snug, but not totally tight. So it has a little bit of breathing space, but this is a great environment for storing books that are especially valuable to you. And it's also cost effective. Photographs are a huge can of worms, but remember, every format of photograph takes its own kind of storage. So black and white and color will take different storage. Your negatives are different yet again from prints. So do your homework, identify the kind of photos you have and the proper way to store them. This is really important for photographs that come from the 1800s and early 1900s. Laser or inkjet printed photos aren't real photos. So if you printed them off at home on your computer, they're not real photos. They won't have the same lifespan. They are very water soluble. So if they do get wet, they're going to run and smear, and that's going to be it. So again, with photos, store like with like. Use clear archival sleeves that are chemically inert. These will go into folders and then into boxes. You can also put these into archival photo albums. And magnetic albums are evil, and I'm going to go into that a little bit later. Never touch the emulsion with bare hands, because even if you just wash your hands, it still leaves hand oil on the surface. Again, use white cotton gloves to sleeve the photos. So as soon as they're sleeved, you're fine. But anytime you're handling unsleeved photos, be careful. Scan your most precious photos, keep them stored in the cloud and on several portable hard drives just in case. And backup on the backup is always good. We'll talk about that a little later too. You never want to bend photos. It breaks the emulsion, so handle them flat. Make sure if it's a large, like an 8x10, that you're supporting it as you handle it. And handle photos by the edges as much as you can, unless they've been sleeved. You can clean photos with an air canister. There's also a product called PEC 12. That's a liquid cleaner and pads that you can safely clean emulsion photos with. Also slides. Make copies of photos for display because of light damage. And in general, black and white photos are more stable than color. So if you've got color photographs that are fading, have them copied before they disappear. And Polaroids are incredibly unstable, especially ones from the 70s and 80s. Also, very old black and white photos may not be stable. Silvering is a common problem with many older photos. Dark portions of the image start to look silvery, literally because the silver used to develop the images starts to leach out. So scan and save or make high quality prints using emulsion on paper to save your images. Store the originals in a photo sleeve. Again, acid-free folder in an acid-free box. Label your photos on the sleeves or on an acid-free slip of paper in the sleeve. If you can help it, do not write on the backs or press, because again, this further damages the emulsion. But you definitely want to identify your photos, because there is nothing worse than being presented with a box full of photos and you can tell the general time period, but there's no event, there are no names, there's no nothing. So they've just lost all of their contextual value. This is an example of silvering. So you'll see what looks like light reflecting off of the bottom and lower left, and that literally is the silver starting to leach back out. These show photos in several kinds of archival sleeves, and more photos and sleeves, and a shot of negatives that are stored in paper sleeves and then are in a acid-free negative box. Okay, so scrapbooks are evil. Most of them, unless they've been made absolutely properly, they destroy the materials that go in them. Some current scrapbooking stores say their material is archival. Their definition holds for 5 to 20 years, not 50 or 100 or longer. These materials become acidic over time. Older scrapbooks can be even worse. They're on highly acidic paper. If you think about the old black paper that we often associate, and glues can also be damaging. And the worst are the magnetic albums that have the waxy dots or stripes on the page. These are incredibly destructive. If you have to make a scrapbook, there are ways to do it archivally. And if you have an old family scrapbook, store it properly. And this is a good example of a magnetic scrapbook. You can see the waxy lines, and over time, the wax degrades, it literally leaches into the photo, and it can come out onto the face of the photograph. And it's really, really hard to get these off the back without damaging them. Here are some shots of a scrapbook from around 1920 with a wide variety of content. So we've got these three-dimensional objects going on here and a safety pin. And here we've got a paper painted doll. We have a doily and a Thanksgiving napkin. So when you're storing old scrapbooks, again, they've got items of a lot of different kinds of materials and three-dimensional items. You can use an overhead scanner or a good camera on a stand to take photos of the pages or even zoom in on individual items. You can interleave the pages with several layers of acid-free tissue paper to mitigate the migration of acid and change it out every few years. Store the scrapbook flat and never put anything else on top of it. It's best to put it in its own archival box or a wrapper to give it further protection, and unlace the bindings, or if it's got the metal pegs, undo those and remove them to relieve the pressure on individual pages, and especially back towards the binding. If something falls out, you can put it in a separate box, or you can put it back in with archival glue, or if it's a photo, you can use Mylar photo corners to put it back in. A little bit about sound recordings. These are things that I've got kicking around. I've got 78 LPs in the center. We've got a 45 RPM single, 7.5-inch reel-to-reel tape, Elvis Presley on 8-track, and an Edison cylinder. So LPs on vinyl are the longest-lived sound format that we know about. When well cared for, they will last at least 100 years. You can put your LPs in archival inner sleeves and exterior sleeves if you want to save what's on the exterior, and turn each LP a quarter turn every year to keep them round, because they will slump over time. You want to store them upright and tightly together and keep them away from heat to prevent warping. I think most of you know you only handle them by the edges. You don't touch the groove surface, and you keep your turntable and needles in really good shape. If you want to listen to a record that's valuable to you, I'd say buy it in another format or play it once and transfer it to a CD or download it digitally. An LP has about 75 really good plays in it before the sound starts to degrade. And with CDs, some of them are starting to delaminate while others are okay. The CD is really a sandwich. So it's got the core and then it's got the surface that the signal is encoded on, and then it's got a surface over that. So it's really a sandwich. If you're worried, transfer them to digital files. If you burn them to another CD for playback or convenience, that's also possible. But again, you're now having to keep up with a set of digital files, and we'll talk about that later. Make sure you've got the proper playback equipment, which is one or more CD players. Most computers no longer come with disk drives, and computers we know obsolesce very fast, and more so than standalone CD or DVD players. And everything I said just holds for DVDs. Cassette tapes are coming to the end of their lives, so you will want to transfer them. Reel-to-reel tapes can have a bit longer lifespan if they're a very high quality. You want to store your magnetic tapes in play mode and not in rewind or fast forward. You want to store them on wooden shelves, and you don't want to store them near magnetic fields like your stereo speakers. You want to store them in play mode because rewind or fast forward really puts the layers of tape very tightly against each other, and you can get magnetic print through. So you'll get ghosting sounds either before or after if you've done that. And if you notice that, again, you can't do anything about it. Tapes and CDs will become unplayable artifacts at some point in time, so you do need to transfer them. And remember, you need functioning playback equipment with any format, and there are companies that specialize in media transfer if you don't want to do it yourself or you can't do it yourself, or if you don't want to have to buy a new CD player or a cassette player just to do it. Textiles. There's so many kinds of textiles that you really do need to do your homework in terms of cleaning and storing. Again, light damages textiles and the dyes that color them. Textiles are easily damaged by insects, vermin, mold, dust and dirt, and wood storage. In general, don't store textiles folded with hard folds in them. You want to pad the folds with an acid-free tissue paper, and specifically acid-free for animal-based cloth like wool, leather, silk, and acid-free buffered for plant-based materials like linen and cotton. You can buy quilt and costume storage boxes that are acid-free as well, that are these huge, large, oversized boxes that do work very well. Vintage clothing can be hung on an archivally padded hanger, or again, stored with folds padded in costume boxes. I would suggest wrapping the buttons and trim, especially if they're metal or plastic or even leather, in acid-free tissue paper. And when in doubt about cleaning or storing or preserving, do your homework and consult a textile conservator. A little bit quickly about artifacts. Again, artifacts are made out of anything and everything, and sometimes in the same artifact. You know, a doll, for example, can have multiple materials in it. And this is the challenge with artifacts, because of that variety of materials, that they can actively harm themselves and other materials. So do your homework. It may take several different cleaning and storing techniques for the same item. As I mentioned, materials, glass, stone, ceramic, pottery, metals may be relatively stable and are easy to take care of. If you collect toys or other things that are more valuable when the box is also present, You probably will have to store the box and artifacts separately so they don't damage each other. And again, when in doubt, consult a curator or specialist in the area of artifacts that you're collecting. These are very small university artifacts stored in an acid-free box resting on ethafoam, which is an inert closed cell foam. And we're going to finish up with why digital is not archival. So there's so many things now that are being born digital. You know, our books, our photos, artwork, sound recordings. So we have to deal with them. There is no national or international archival standard platform or format for digital storage that allows us to keep digital objects for a long time. Archival storage is loosely defined as safely retaining your materials for 50 to 500 years. So large institutions and consortia are creating their own standards and backups for digital permanence, but you don't have access to this very likely. You don't have an IT department. You don't have a huge backup system. So how do we deal with this? If it's incredibly important, I would suggest keeping it in an analog format. So go back to paper or whatnot, store it archivally, do it old school. Accessible media like books, photographs, and photocopies have no hardware or software standing between the user and the content. So there's nothing to become obsolete. So this is why you should consider making analog copies of materials if necessary. Books printed on acid-free paper, photocopies on acid-free paper, and stored archivally potentially can last 500 years. Photographs printed with emulsion can also last several hundred years. And please don't fall into the trap of scanning all your photos and tossing the originals, or moving your family films and videos to DVD and tossing the originals. I talk to students on a regular basis who say they have no baby pictures because mom or dad scanned all their family photos onto the hard drive, didn't back it up, threw away the originals, and had a hard drive crash. Therefore, they have no baby pictures. So here are some 3¼ inch floppy disks that now for most people are pretty good as only coasters. So if you did have materials stored on floppy disk, do you still have the hardware or software to read them? Did you get everything transferred from them before they went belly up? Probably not. Most of us didn't. Digital is great for making use copies or for sharing, but it's not in archival storage mode. And remember, not only is the hardware and software unstable and proprietary, storage mediums are short-lived, so thumb drives, disk, whatever, even hard drives. And you must have the hardware and the software in order to be able to read materials. Think about the fact computers are now being made with no USB ports, meaning that you can't even use your thumb drive. As I mentioned, no digital storage medium has been designed for archival storage. These mediums are designed to be changed every few years, and I think to keep consumers buying. Using the cloud is one form of backup, but it cannot be your only digital storage location. The cloud is made up of servers in huge server farms, and people who run cloud storage businesses do indeed go belly up, and there goes your stuff. If you decide to retain materials digitally, you have to be ready to migrate early and often, and you have to educate yourself about digital storage. And this is going to be ongoing from here on out. And when I say digital, I'm talking about materials either born digital or materials that have been moved from an analog format to a digital format. So something that you've scanned, or a sound recording, let's say cassette tape that you've turned into a WAV file. Also, current archival recommended formats are shifting. So again, talk to an archivist, talk to a curator. For example, best practice right now, is photos and slides should be digitized at least 600 dpi. Archivists use TIFF files instead of the more common JPEGs. JPEGs are a compressed format, and pixels are dropped so that they can be stored in less space. Often you'll hear it called a lossy format. TIFFs take up a lot more storage, but they're not compressed, and it's much better for long-term storage. Check your media annually to make sure it's still readable, and if not, back it up from another source. And again, I will reiterate, saving digital media takes a lot of time and a willingness to keep up with new formats, because you will end up transferring files several times over the course of the next even 10 to 20 years. Formats, hardware, software, standards, and recommendations are going to change frequently. Letting your digital media sit unattended without keeping it transferred or backed up guarantees it will disappear. It's much more ephemeral than analog materials. A diary, for example, can stand up to inattention much longer than a scanned version of a diary. An analog diary will last 100, 150 years if it just sits on your shelf. The scanned version, 5 to 15 years. Archivists currently use what they call the lock system, stands for lots of copies, keep stuff safe. And this is a geographically distributed digital storage model. And by that, we simply mean that you literally keep lots of copies in different places. You can do something similar by making sure that you back up your computer hard drive onto a portable hard drive, plus use cloud storage. You might want to keep a second portable hard drive far away from your house. A lot of people use the 3-2-1 rule, especially with digital photos, but it works with all digital content. You make 3 copies on at least 2 different kinds of storage mediums and save at least one in a place different from where you live. Move your digital storage to new mediums every 5 to 7 years to fight obsolescence of hardware and software, and also to avoid the failure of storage mediums because they're short-lived. Let's say you have a thumb drive or a portable drive that you're backing stuff up to. The more you use it, the more likely it is to fail. Also, a lot of people forget to make sure family members know where their digital stuff is stored and make sure they have access to usernames and passwords. Because if you get hit by a truck, that stuff could all go away. Here is this is a 0.5 terabyte portable hard drive. Very small, very easy to work with. So to review, digital is great for sharing, but it's not archival. Educate yourself about digital storage so you don't lose material. You have to be actively engaged in keeping your storage media, hardware, and software updated. You have to be willing to, again, keep your backup systems backed up every time you add to them. Consider creating a lock system for yourself with family and friends. Make analog backups for things that are especially important. And again, you might want to make a couple different copies and store them in different places. And maintaining things digitally takes time and dedication, so just plan on it. For the larger overview, I hope you now know some of the enemies that are collectibles. You've got a better idea about how to handle, store, and display the more common collectibles. You've got strategies for keeping your stuff depending on what you want to do with it. You know that digital is not archival, and you have some strategies to deal with materials that are created or stored digitally. You will soon have Don Williams' book, Saving Stuff, to get you started. You will have a handout to help you and to guide you to more resources. And you also will know about catalogs from some of the major archival and museum suppliers. Their websites have great educational information. Oops, this is a very fast overview of what your resource guide is going to look like. And again, this is tip of the iceberg stuff. But preservation and conservation supplies, I buy materials from Gaylord, from Archival Products, from Hollinger, and from University Products. So these are all archivally solid. I would urge you to buy from them and not from Michael's or Joann's or or something that's aimed more at hobbyists in terms of this, even though some places are starting to carry a little bit more archival material. Websites, NEDCC, Northeast Document Conservation Center. These folks are the experts, and they have a great set of preservation leaflets. They also offer webinars. Some are for a fee, but they're excellent. They do fill up fast. They do offer some free webinars that are recorded. Then you can log on and view them for free. You can just view them for free on the website anyway, but these folks are great. And then several more websites from the Library of Congress. Books, a listing of a few more books. Again, I would urge you to look for anything that's written by archivists, by conservators, by people who are working in the business. So they are going to give you much more accurate information. Conservators. If you need to hire a conservator, to find a conservator, you can contact an archives or museum that collects in your area of interest. Conservators often will specialize in particular materials. So if you need a quilt conserved, you want a textile conservator. You don't want a photo or a paper conservator. You can have sticker shop. These folks do not work cheap. It takes a lot of education and experience to do this kind of work. And again, I like to say it's like knowing when to call the plumber. You don't want to try to fix something and do more damage yourself. The American Institute for Conservation has an excellent Find a Conservator tool, and it's a good place to start. Also, a little bit about appraisers. You may need to find an appraiser for several reasons. One would be just to know what it's worth. You may want to insure it or sell it or donate it. And if it's worth a lot and you want to either sell it or donate it, you want to have the appraisal done by a certified appraiser. Legitimate archives and museums cannot provide you with an appraisal because of conflict of interest issues. Some auction companies do appraisal, and some commercial businesses that deal in rare books, manuscripts, stamps, coins, etc., will also do appraisals. But again, watch out for people who will give you a low appraisal and then offer to buy it from you. And then they'll turn around and sell it high. Again, by a long shot, not all commercial businesses are dishonest, but this does happen. Also, the Indiana Historical Society locally maintains a list of appraisers, even though they don't vet the list and they don't vouch for these people, but it's a good place to start. Certified appraisers have a set of ethical guidelines they have to follow. Most of them do not sell or deal in rare materials because of conflict of interest. If you want to donate something that's worth about $5,000 and you want to take it as a tax write-off, you'll need a certified appraiser. Also for sale, again, you'll need one because the buyer will want to know an accurate price. But again, you might just want to check with a regular appraiser, describe what you've got, tell them that you're really just trying to figure out a ballpark figure for this, because if you don't want to pay somebody $200 an hour to appraise a $50 item. But here are the two certified appraiser organizations in the United States that you can contact as well. So I'm sorry I ran a little over our hour, but again, thank you so much for attending. Thanks to Stephen and Indie Public for hosting. Here is my contact information, and we are now open for questions, and I am going to quit sharing the screen.